Hey guys, welcome back to the Deep Dive Machine Learning channel. This is Yagesh Bobde, and today we are going to be continuing with our tutorial series on Python, and we'll be covering conditional statements and loops in this particular tutorial, that is tutorial number 2. Alright, so let's get started. So now let's start with the new topic, conditional statements. Conditional statement is when you want a specific condition to be true, and if that condition is true, then you want to do something with it, right? So first let's study if statement. So if is basically, even in English language you use the term if, right? So if this happened, then I will do that. That's how you use in English. So if a certain condition is true, then I'll follow along with my next set of commands. So the statements can be executed and will only be executed if this condition is true. So if this is false, then nothing will happen. The statements will not be executed. So here, let's see an example. So here I'm directly putting true value, right? So if true, then print true. So basically the condition is already true, so it will print true. But what if I put false? Now the condition is false, so nothing will happen because the print statement won't get executed, because it, it should only be executed. See, this if statement tells that it will only be executed if this condition becomes true. So for example, instead of true, if I write something like, if I write, see, first let's just give a name, and then I write Yagesh, and then here I write name dot is alphabet, right? So now if this condition, sorry, is alpha. So now if this condition is true, then it will run the following. Now let's see, name dot is alpha. So it will check whether the string has only alphabets, and that yes, the string only has alphabets, right? So this condition will return true, and the next statement should get executed. Let's see if that happens. Is alpha, sorry, I made a mistake. Yes, it returns true. So that's how basically an if statement works. Now let's see if else statement. So we already know if this condition gives true, then we need to follow along with the commands. Now what about the false? If this condition gives false, then what do we do? So for that we need an else statement, right? So this is what we typically do. If we use an if statement, for that we also specify an else, so that the condition, if it becomes false, then the else condition will run. So here we have an example, is alpha. We have defined a string 1, that is Yagesh, and then we use dot is alpha. We already know that this only contains alpha, so this will be true and this will run. So let's change it up a bit. I am a content creator. So not only does this contain alphabets, it also contains these spaces, right? So this is alpha method will return false. So instead of this statement, it will go into else, and this whole thing will run, right? So we see that the string doesn't have only numerical values. The string doesn't have only numerical values. Sorry, it should be alpha. The string doesn't have. So you can use it like that to check for a given condition. And if and else statement are used like this in connection with each other. But what if you have more than one condition to check? For example, here we'll use elif or else if statement. So if you have a number 100, if you want to check if number is less than 10, then print the input is less than 10. Then you can also write elif. This basically means else if for this condition. You want to specify another condition. So here you can use number is greater than 10, then print this. If the number is equal to 10, and this is something to note because equal to sign in programming is assignment operator, right? So what how can we compare two values which in maths equal to does, right? So for that we use equal to. This basically is the equal to operator in maths that you study, right? So this equal to value compares this number and this 10. So if both of them are equal, then it will print this, right? So now let's try. What happens is, this number, we already know number is 100, so it's greater than 10. So this else if condition will be printed. So the input is greater than 10, that's what it's print, right? What if we change the value and write 10? So now number equal to 10, right? So this condition should be printed, and that's what it prints. Now, if you don't want to write, for example, here we see that number is less than 10 or it is greater than 10. So the only option that remains is equal to 10. So instead of specifically writing equal to 10, we can just write else condition, that else do this. If both of these conditions are false, then directly print the input is equal to 10. So let's comment this out. And now when we execute the following statements, it will give you the input is equal to 10. And that's what we expect. Now, let's start with what is looping, right? So, looping, when you hear that term, you probably remember circles, right? Or you circle something that is looping. Even when you search the term looping, you probably get images in Google search like this loop, this infinite loop, and this loop, donuts. So, all of us have a basic, like an image of what is looping in our minds, right? In programming languages, what looping means is repeating a same thing a number of times. So basically you're circling around. That's why it is looping, right? So you loop around and come back to a same thing and repeat it a number of times. That's basically looping. Now, for example, if you have to do this task, like print this statement, so print this statement almost, I don't know, maybe 10 times, maybe 100 times. So I would have to do this, right? So let's just do it 5 times. So I would have to type this entire thing 5 times to be able to get this output, right? But all I'm doing is just printing this one statement five times, right? A number of times. It could be 100 times, 1,000 times, 10,000 times, and maybe more. So do I have a better solution for this? And the answer is yes, and that's where looping comes in. So first, let's study for loops. Let's actually make it an heading. So for loops. So basic syntax for loop is this. You write for and then give a variable in and then sequence. And then you write a number of statements that you have to execute. For example, here we want this print statement to be executed a number of times. So this print statement will come here in the indentation. So this will get repeated a number of times. So these are the statements that need to be in a loop, that need to get repeated. So let's discuss this an example for I in range 1 to 10. Actually, let's discuss what range is. All of you have a general idea, right? What range is. When I say a range of number, that means from this number to that number, you have a given list of numbers or a range of numbers, right? Basically, that's the only way I know how to describe it, I guess. So range is the exact same thing that you have an idea about. For example, if I say range 10, so what this does is it creates a range of numbers from 0 to 10, but not including the, actually that's right, but excluding 10. That means it will go from 0 and 1 2 3 4 all up to 10. That means the last value will be 9, because in Python it excludes this value because it starts with 0. Python is a like mostly a zero indexing language, so it starts from 0. That's why it excludes 10. So if we try to print it, what will happen is it will print range 0 to 10. So range is basically a short form notation of writing a range of numbers. So if I really want to print all those numbers, what I could do is I could write list like this. So now it will print all that numbers instead of the short form, right? So range is a pretty useful function because instead of writing all these numbers, now I can directly write it in one word range, right? So let's discuss range in a bit more detail. So now here we saw that it started with 0, right? So what if I want it to start with another number? So let's first discuss a basic syntax for range function. See, range function has a starting value, a ending value, and a step value, I guess. So if you give it a starting value, instead of 0, it will start from there, and you can directly give the ending value, right, like we gave it here, and it will go up till the ending value, excluding the ending value. Here we gave it 10, so it went up till 9. That means it's excluded 10, right? And step value is basically if you want something like this. If you want to skip some range of numbers, or if you want to follow a special sequence, right? For example, if I want, sorry, let's directly range. Let's start it from a 1, and let's start it from 10, and let's go all the way up till 100. And step is basically when I want it to skip a number of beats, right? So let's say I wanted to skip 10 numbers a time. So what it will do is, here starting point was 10, so it started with 10, but now instead of going to 11, when I assigned it the step value here, this step value, that basically means it will step over all these numbers. So it stepped over 10 numbers and all went all the way up to 20. And similarly 30, 40, all the way till the ending value, that is 100. But the problem is I won't include 100 because we already discussed that this ending value shouldn't be included, right? So the last value will be 90. So that's how basically a range function works. So now let's see how we use a for loop with range, right? So here we write for I in range. We discussed the syntax, right? So we write first for, that's what we wrote. Then we give a variable. For now, let's say it's I. And then in, we wrote that. And then sequence. So here we have a sequence that is range 1 to 10. And I will tell you why I've written sequence, because instead of range, I could have also written here a dictionary or a tuple, a list, that will be studying later, and we'll be dealing with those later. Here, basically, we wrote the exact syntax for a for loop, right? So now, what exactly does this mean and what does this do? Here I told you, right? If I have this task of printing the statements 10 times, then I will directly do this. So now you see that this print statement got printed out 10 times. I don't even need to count it because I already know when I gave this range tells me that this loop will run 10 times, and this entire print statement will be executed 10 times. So let's see what exactly is going on here. So first let's print out what exactly this range 10 is. So here we see range 10 basically means from 0 all the way up till 9, right? Because of the whole excluding 10 thing. And we also want to know what exactly the role I plays here, right? We don't know that. So let's also print I every time this runs. So we see this, that it prints the statement, and then it prints the value of I, right? So here we see that I has a value of 0. But next time, after these two statements get executed, we see that this statement again gets executed. That means after these two statements, you all the way go back to the first statement. That means you loop over and go back once again to the first statement. So here you again execute these two statements. But the thing to observe here is that now the value of I gets printed 1. And similarly here it gets printed 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. So what exactly is happening? So what happens is this variable, this I here we defined, it could be anything. I could just define it Y, or I could be A, or I could write entire name. I could write anything, any variable name you can think of. But for simplicity's sake, and as a standard example, most people use I, so we'll go with that. What happens here is this I traverses through this sequence, in this case, which is range 10, and what happens is this I first gets assigned the first element. That means I gets assigned 0. So here, when we print I, it prints 0 for the first time. Then when it loops again, now I from 0, it jumps to the next value, that is 1. So now when these two statements get executed the second time, this I has a value of 1. And similarly, when it loops over again, now from 1, it jumps to 2. And so on for 2, then 3, then 4, all the way up till 9. And then when this 9 occurs and it again tries to loop, there is no next element. So it comes out of the loop, and the remaining statement if there were statements like here, print loop is over. So after this 9, you see that this print statement loop is over gets executed, which is not included in the loop, right? So this indentation shows that these statements are included in this loop, right? So this print statement get executed after all the 10 times these loop happens. So basically, when the ending value comes, after that the next iteration in the next iteration, the I doesn't have any value to get assigned, right? So the loop breaks, and the remaining of the Python program continues to move on with the rest of the code. So that's how basically a for loop works. Now let's take another example. For I in range 10, as we saw earlier, let's increase this to 100. And now let's get a bit more intuition of what exactly is happening. So I think you might not know what this end function does. Basically, here you see that this print statement, every time this is executed, the next time I run the print, it always gets assigned in the next line, right? So this next line thing is basically what this end function changes, end argument changes, sorry. So basically here we say that first print I, then instead of going to the next line, just print a space. So when we execute this, see all the way till 100 loop, because I wrote a range of 100. So now I is one by one getting assigned the value of 0, then 1, then all the way till 100, not including 100. That means 99. So 99, that is the 100th loop, right? So here what I'm printing is first the value of I, this 0, and then instead of new value, this end statement signifies that instead of new value, I want a space. So this space gets printed. Then I have another print statement which tells you that I want this, and in dot format I have written I plus 1. Why have I written I plus 1? Because the starting value is 0, right? So 0 here, when I is 0, it is our first loop, right? It is the first time we are running the loop. Since it starts 0, but we normally start counting from 1, right? So we want the value of I plus 1. So that's why in format I've written I plus 1, which gets assigned to this bracket, and this statement after space get printed as 1, the first two, for the first loop, right? So similarly, it happens for all the way up till the 99th loop, right? So that's how for loops work. Right. Let's now discuss while loop. See, these are the only two types of loop that you'll find in Python, for loop and while loop. So while loop has this syntax where you write while and then you give a condition. And when this condition becomes true, like in if condition, like we studied if else statement, right? So in if else, if this condition was true, then you would go about doing the next thing, right? Go about doing these inside statements. Similarly, in while loop, you will only loop when this condition is true. If it becomes false, then the loop breaks and you come out of the loop. So let's take an example. Let's say I is 0, and let's give a condition here. Say when I is less than 5, run. So basically how you will read is, while the value of I is less than 5, I want to run the following code, and the following code here is just a single line, that is print I. But this will be an infinite loop because I is 0, right? So this is printing 0 and 0 0 unlimitedly. So this is an infinite loop. I will have to break this myself. So I press this. I'm interrupting the code. Now what to do? So let's see. I could do something like this. So this is one way of writing I is equal to I plus 1. That means every time this loop is running, I am increasing the value of I. So let's see now what happens. See, now the code stops after 4. What happened here? Let's try to observe. Let's try to see what happens here. So first, I is equal to 0, and while loop, we have a condition of I is less than 5. And then we have a print statement of I. So when I was 0, we printed I, that is 0, and then what we did was we incremented the value of I by 1. So that means now the current value of I after one loop is 1. Instead of 0, now it increased all the way up to 1. Now when the next loop runs, it will again check the condition, is I less than 5? Then yes, I is less than 5 because it is 1, right? So it will go ahead with the loop and try to execute both these lines. So it will print I again, that is 1. Then it will increment I by 1. Now from 1 it becomes 2. So now again the loop will run and it will check, is I less than 5? So it is 2, right? So it is less than 5. So it will go ahead and run this code and so on. But when I becomes 4, now when we increment it by 1, it will become 5. And when it checks this condition, is I less than 5? No, I is not less than 5, right? Because it became 5, so it is equal to 5. So this statement won't run anymore because I has already become 5. So that's why it stops, and now you get out of the loop and you stop here at 4. And while loops are mostly used for infinite loops, so let's conclude this tutorial here, and we'll continue with the next topic, that is Python data structures, in the next tutorial, tutorial number 3. And see you guys next time.